Awesome. Father Michael, thank you for joining me today.
Good morning. Pleased to be here. Great privilege
Awesome.
and an honor. Glad to be part of your podcast.
Thank you. We met about a year ago in a men's program, as a men's coaching program run through Connor Beat from Man Talks.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what we'll start off with like your story. How did you end up in what you're doing now, and then how did that converge with men's work in your own life and then what you're seeing going forward?
Yeah, with Connor's work. Since your audience probably doesn't know me at all, I've been an Orthodox priest for 30 years. And I've also been interested just sort of in what we used to call men's work or men's studies. I was interested in that back in the 80s, in the time before writing and the time before interwebs, even before Robert Bly wrote Iron John. I mean, I remember when that was first published in 1990, and I've been interested in this stuff for like 40 plus years, mostly to try to make sense out of my own life and when I was younger to help myself grow up. And then about 7 years ago, before the lockdown started, we started getting this influx of young men into the church. And it's turned into a flood nowadays. There are thousands of young men coming to the Orthodox Church nowadays. And I was real curious as to why this particular demographic was finding us so attractive. And so I had I have sort of an initial conversation with all of them that come in, and they were all singing the same kind of song. Evidence of sort of confusion between or inability fully to launch. They're stuck somewhere between late adolescence and early adulthood, can't quite get over that hump. Quarter life crisis, some people call it. They were just stuck. They'd finally grown up a bit and knew that they needed to finish growing up and weren't quite sure how. And they were looking for a transcendent purpose, something genuinely big and meaningful to believe in. They were looking for structure. In many cases, they were looking for Dad 2.0, an elder figure, who could kind of help them and guide them through all of this stuff. And I recognized all of this stuff. So I've been able to provide some genuine service there. And out of that initial experience with these guys coming to my church, I realized that they're a very small segment of a much larger population of young men that maybe are not finding their way to the church or not finding in religion the kind of transcendent or meaningful purpose for their lives. And I began having more contact outside of church circles with these guys, and that sort of blossomed into an expansion of what started as my own ministry and my own parish has now kind of expanded outward. And I found a place on social media where I seem to have a message that resonates with a lot of the younger men, who are out there. So that's kind of what I do. And so I've sort of parlayed that, all of that experience, 40 years in men's work, 30 years, doing pastoral counseling, hearing tens of thousands of confessions when people have opened their hearts to me, in significant and very intimate ways. I've translated that or brought that to bear, sort of a broader community. And I hope to be able to help these younger guys optimize their lives. If I can put it this way, I kind of help guys get their balls back and their hearts back and their minds back so they can have the life and relationships they want. And that's kind of what I'm about and kind of where I am now.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's interesting for me to see how many different angles of the world that these problems are coming to bear. And like I remember watching a podcast a while back, and it was like this guy who was like an intellectual. He was all about academia and research and deep thinking. And another guy was talking about how he was like an ex-military. Jocko Willink, if you know who he is.
Yeah, I know. I know who Jocko is.
Jocko Willink, and there was Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
And how they both kind of came to the same conclusion about like the need for structure and purpose and direction, especially for men from two seemingly different angles. Like one being like military competence and like performance, the other being like research through history and philosophy and all this stuff. And we're kind of now use the third angle is like religion starting to see it.
Yes.
And we're pulling it out of the sciences and like sociology and psychology and all this stuff. And it's getting crazy, and it's getting harder and harder, I think, for people to continually deny the importance of healthy men in a healthy society and healthy male figures for which it was meant to operate off of. But what we're seeing now is this massive social. It's a pretty. I don't know how big it is, but it feels bigger, and I think it's because like the wrong people have the megaphone.
Yeah, I think the problem is huge.
Yeah.
Actually, there was um, it's just an article I just saw today. I had a link to it. I'll have to send it to you afterwards. But
Mm-hmm.
the gist of it was it's like the strong old gods are returning. That it was sort of like the end of the 20th century, which is a little more extended, sort of the modern world that began with the end of World War II, and that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of extended up to the present now. That order is largely going away. We're at a big, huge transition. The election of Trump is a symptom or a sign of that change. But
Mm-hmm.
what it also speaks to, and I found the article compelling because it exactly described the situation of a lot of the young men that I work with. And what they found is that they had grown up in a world where sort of progressive or more liberal values held forth, where no, we don't want strong families, we don't want strong responsibility, we don't want strong borders, we don't want a lot of this stuff that seems divisive and isn't equal, and is points to personal superiority or things like that. No, well, what we really want is sort of a nice, equal, safe world where there's not international conflict, where everybody is welcome, where you can pretty much do your own thing. And what it is, yeah, sort of the gist of the article was, and even religion was, it was nice, contemporary, meaningful, relevant, but it was largely nice. Didn't really challenge anybody. Nobody could really be excluded. You couldn't say things like, Christianity is the true faith, and you really need to follow Christ, or there's potential ramifications in eternity if you don't. That's just was considered so gauche and and intolerant
Mm-hmm.
that you couldn't say stuff like that. And what the article was basically saying is that seems to be going away, that nature is asserting itself, that there are fundamental differences between men and women, that there are hierarchies, uh, that there is sort of a natural order in which people tend to flourish, and that does include things like group identity, my own race, my own nation, my own country, my own people. It does point to strong, stable families. It does point to clearer roles for men in masculinity and women in femininity. Um, and I think we're beginning to see a bit of that, come back. I mean, it's sort of, I know it's an ancient Chinese curse, but we definitely live in interesting times nowadays. There's plenty to talk about as a result.
Yeah. There's so many things I could pull on there, but yeah, this I when I was growing up, I was very, for lack of better words, anti-religious. 'Cause I just thought it was like, oh, really? You believe in a magical, invisible man in the sky? Seriously?
Oh,
Okay.
yes, Sky Daddy. Yes, yes, I'm
Yeah,
familiar.
Sky.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Sky Daddy. We have a pretty close relationship, but I have slightly more reverent terms for him.
Yeah, but in recent years, I've been doing like I've discussed the amount of research, reading books, and learning about this stuff, and you start to see like there's just this inevitable overlap on certain parts of human psychology and biology, and realistically, like what was the maybe not the optimal path, but the best, it was optimal for what we were able to do with it through
Hmm.
history that led us to be relatively successful. And not everybody, like me personally, I tend to gear more towards like science and like a hint of spirituality.
Hmm.
But it's like the more you research, the more you figure out like, oh, it's like from my perspective, it's like science, spirituality and religion figured out what science is now catching up on.
Yeah, you're doing the hard empirical work, and like that old
Yes.
saw was, the scientists will climb the last mountain of reality and find a little group of monks who have been sitting there for centuries. you know and honestly, I mean, at least as an Orthodox Christian and as a man with a PhD in church history and patristics, which is the study of the fathers, at least is consistent in the old Christian tradition that for us the same logos of God, the Word of God, who was incarnate in the flesh in the person of Jesus Christ, was also the same one who inspired the scriptures, but he is also the same one who created and is present in and through the natural order. So in the old Christian tradition, which the Orthodox Church still maintains, there cannot be any contradiction between science and the laws of physics and the laws of biology and the scripture and the revelation, that in the Christian tradition. If there's apparent contradictions, we have not understood the questions well enough, and we ought to hold our opinions a little lightly, because it's the same God who created and informs every single one of them. So there must be a consistency there. And that gives me a lot of hope. I like to see what's going on in science, and every so often you'll come across some things that are just really confirming, of sort of like ancient truths, and I'm not even specifically Christian truths, but just stuff that ancient philosophy and whatever tradition has worked out. And it's all there. I see kind of a slow convergence, and I think eventually we might get there.
Yeah, from what's going on nowadays, there was an idea you mentioned about hierarchies and competence and gender roles and things like that, and how it's kind of wired into us on a biological level. And I think there's almost like this cruel, maybe this is like the Luciferian in action. It's almost like cruel joke played on human beings of the idea that we can imagine what perfection could look like, and therefore we can imagine that we should be able to strive towards it, when in reality, like you said, nature is just kind of kicking back, so that maybe like some sense of perfection is just more living in harmony with who we are naturally. But then they kick back to that. As a book I just finished reading like literally yesterday. It's a book called Feminism Against Progress, and it's actually written by a woman who is like a staunch feminist, but she basically makes the point to say like it's going a little bit too far, because it's desperately trying to derail fundamental biology in favor of what we could imagine life could be, if only we can just completely manipulate and articulate our bodies and our minds using technology and pharmaceutical drugs and things like that to be this perfect version of ourselves, rather than just living in like the bodies we're given. And she refers to it as meat Lego Gnosticism, like meat, like MEAT, meat Lego Gnosticism. The idea being that like our body parts are essentially interchangeable like Legos. We're just flesh bags of meat walking around with the soul inside, and everything that is material is clearly evil, because it's along with the Gnostic sect of things back in the day. But that in her case, she was like very staunch, ultra feminist, ultra liberal, never wanted to do anything with like the natural order of life. She tried to be like, she lived through the 70s, I think, and 80s. I think she was a teenager in the 70s, so it was like post-sexual like revolution, around that sexual revolution at that time, sleeping around, being a free person, doing whatever she wants. And then eventually, like in her 30s, she was like, fuck, I really want to have kids. My body is really kicking up pretty hard right now. She met somebody, she had her first child, and she said like the experience internally of like my brain telling me desperately that I want to spend time with my child, that like it's not someone convincing me to, it's an innate feeling built into me. But if we keep going down this path of kind of like meat Lego Gnosticism, at some point we'll be able to figure out the particular drug cocktail that turns off that particular part of your brain, so then you can still be free to do whatever you want. But the idea being like, you're free to do whatever you want, but then what you wanted to do before was usually a function of the impulses you have built into you biologically and naturally. So at which point, if you take everything away, what's left except for just like a computer that just does what it's on its program, written by somebody else?
Yes, and that ceases to be human. I think that's ultimately it. I think we've lived with a bit of a myth of the possibilities of human freedom. And, perfection somehow needs to correspond to who we are. It needs to correspond to human nature. So, I mean, to fall back on very classical philosophy, we have intellects. What's the purpose of the intellect? To know truth. We have a will. What's the purpose of the will? To do the good. I mean, that's Plato and Aristotle. It's brought up completely into the Western tradition and all, but there are biological differences between men and women. There are neurological differences. There are psychological differences.
It's forbidden to say. I can't say.
I know it's forbidden to say. It's there in the hard data.
Yeah.
It was really fun. I forget who said it. Some guy said, yes, I had children, I had boys, and I didn't want to really try to influence them to be kind of particularly masculine or macho, but they were 3 years old and they chewed their toast into pistols. It's, it's just, that's just kind of the way it's the nature of the beast. I know. I raised 2 boys myself, and I was amazed at the things that they came up with on their own.
Oh yeah.
And they were very often paradigmatically boy. And so this idea of I think it's a flawed notion of what perfection is, that perfection means I do whatever I damn well please with no constraints and nobody telling me what I want to do, a kind of absolute voluntarism that I don't think is practical, and I don't think it's even grounded in reality.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a fairly strong proponent of free will, but free will is even constrained by birth order. I know how me and my sister were. I had, 2 boys. The older one was typically a firstborn, and the next one was typically a younger son or a middle child. We're constrained by language. I had studied a couple of them. There are things that you can say and concepts you can have in French, or in Spanish that just aren't as clear in English. And things are funnier in French. Some things, some things are funnier in English. Socioeconomic status. We have absolute freedom, but when I grew up in a very small town in East Texas of 600 people, and I was related to half of them, the opportunities for me were a local service job in blue collar, or working for the big Dow chemical company that was on the outskirts of town. I was the first one in my family, or my generation was the first one that really went off to college, or really moved away from the little town we all grew up in. So yeah, we're free, but there are a whole lot of constraints that are on our freedom. And I think if we're going to lead flourishing lives, I think it behooves us to take into account those very real constraints, or the limitations that we have on our freedom, and again, to live according to our nature, to where what would be a perfect life would be the life that would be fully human, fully in accord with our nature, and that's optimized within the parameters of the life that we're given. I can't imagine the happiness of a life that ceased to be human. I mean, I'm sure there are people who can, but forgive me, maybe
you
it's just
think you
my
could
age.
imagine,
I don't
but
want to live it.
yeah, and the problem is like there is something fundamentally human that especially a lot of men figure out at some point, is that there really is a certain purpose through some degree of voluntary suffering. So working towards a difficult task that you don't think you could do.
Yeah.
Like what you were referring to a second ago was, on some level, it's like this ultra hedonistic outlook on life of like, do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. No one can tell me otherwise, and I'll be happy. Not realizing that the way we're kind of wired fundamentally is that a lot of our joy and happiness tends to come from the suffering we go through. And this is me with the neuroscience now. It's like, you've ever heard like in the case of things like dopamine and dopaminergic activities, there is a particular range that your brain can naturally handle of how much you can really kick into. And if you stay too high for too long, like it's like it kind of like oscillates around like an average.
Mm-hmm.
If you stay too high for too long, eventually it comes crashing down below baseline. Baseline being like your normal. And this is exactly what you see with people who have like addictions and things like that. It's like you feel good, you get used to it, and then it comes back down, and either you have to either take more, and when you finally stop, you just feel horrible. It's a disgusting feeling. Why? Because you were way too high for way too long, and you didn't do something meaningfully that sucked to make it kind of like get back to something like on the way. And natural oscillations through life is pretty much how we're optimally designed to do. And I think the thinking is like, oh, we can go down this route of ultra pleasure 24/7 nonstop. And the problem is we keep looking at other people outside of ourselves to find the answers, when a lot of times it's like just understanding your own biology, at least for me, was a big one. Like 2 examples I think of is like Michael Phelps, when he won the 7 gold medals of the Olympics, he had the worst depression of like for like 5 years afterwards. And he's like, why would you be depressed? It's like, because you're riding that high that fucking hard, being the best in the world, training your ass off. And then finally, when you stop, it has to come crashing back down to get back to baseline again.
what can you live for after you've lived for the Olympics?
He's found things in his life. He's got.
Yeah, you have to. You really have to. You have to do, I think, some very intentional work on shifting your perspective around. But I mean, you live for stuff like that for so long; it's got to be difficult.
He got married and he has kids, and that's what he lives for now. He's very
Okay.
happy, actually.
Yeah.
But and then for me, I remember I made this point several times. Is that like I used to do rowing on the crew team back in college,
Okay.
about 15 years ago. And you'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go drive to the water by 5 o'clock to get on the water by like 5:30, 6 o'clock. We didn't have docks. So we had to walk into the water on the North Shore in Long Island, New York, which was freezing because we had to go because the cruise season wouldn't start until April. So we had to start training in February. So the water was like just north of 40 degrees walking into it. And then you got to like row your ass off, blast your lungs out, can't even breathe, sweating your butt off, step back into freezing cold water again, walk the boats back, go back to school, and then start your day. And like every day that I got back and took a shower was the best shower I've ever had in my entire life. Every single day. And it's like you look at why, because like if you just take a shower because life's easy, it's not going to feel good. But if you just did something fucking grueling like that and really push yourself to your limits and then come back, like this simple stuff becomes amazing. And it's the same thing we talk about the dopamine thing. It's like if you want to feel good, you kind of have to be in shit for a while to let yourself kick back up again. And yeah,
I think you're right on that. I got nothing to add, and I forget there was somebody who had been a rower wrote a book about it or
yeah.
included some lengthy descriptions of it, and the way he described his lungs burning,
Oh my
and then
god,
realized he was like only a quarter of the way
that was
through the
I think you're talking about Professor Galloway, Scott
Galloway.
Galloway.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember the interview.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's just, my God, the description of it was so graphic. I mean, I could, and the metallic taste in the mouth,
yep.
you can almost taste your blood. And I
You thought
forget
you're
what,
yep.
lactic acid just through the
Oh
roof.
yeah, yeah. The lactic acid, it's being produced faster than your body can metabolize it, so it has nowhere to go. So it just starts going into like literally into your face, the top of your head, your ears start burning, your
Yeah,
feet are burning, and you're only like a third of the way there. But
I,
what it shows you fantastically, especially for young men who really want to know where their limits lie, is like I didn't know I was capable of doing that. Like a lot of the psychological barriers you have in place are there. They're designed to keep you safe. But the problem is that like you don't really know your limits until you start pushing through it. And when you come up against those limits, you're going to start to hear a lot of like negative thoughts and a lot of things going through your head telling you should be doing this right now, all this stuff. And then, but you walk away going like, holy shit, I didn't think I could do that. That was amazing. What else could I do? How much more could I get out of life if I tried?
exactly. And
And
those have been, those moments for me have been optimal. Like those are real peak moments in a man's life where you get a real sense of, oh, I don't have to believe this narrative. I am capable of so much more. What else can I do?
mm-hmm,
If I can do this much, what else can I do?
yeah,
And then like possibilities open up and life gets real interesting.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, at that point. I was just in some of my teaching and my coaching. I like Stephen Kotler's work on flow state,
mm-hmm,
and he talks about that. He says it's what's the optimal effort is like 4% past your limit.
yeah,
You just, which, if go ahead and I'll quote, oh, good heavens, Art of Way of the Superior Man. Who is that? David Data,
David Data,
who
yeah,
talks about pushing your edge and leaning into your fear,
yep,
not jumping in with both feet, not doing anything stupid or, or,
mm-hmm,
or dangerous. Just lean into it a little bit and you get to a sweet spot where it's really interesting and it's challenging, but it's not so challenging that your anxiety goes through the roof or you want to back up, and it's not so easy that you get bored with it and it's not doing you any good. It's like that last rep in the gym,
mm-hmm.
where can I get this one out? Can I, that's the one. Arnold says that's the one that makes you grow.
It's true,
And
actually, it is. Yeah,
well, yeah,
there's
I
science behind that. Yep.
kind of know that from personal experience too. Yeah, uh, but that's it. Leaning into it and pushing there, though. But that is a really sweet spot. And I tell you and at least in my own experience, few times have I felt as alive as
Mm.
when I was there. And it's just a marvelous, marvelous place to be. I'm sure you confirm it in your own life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's almost, you could live for moments like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's what we're seeing with a lot of men nowadays. So this is interesting. This ties back to, you mentioned earlier, like masculinity and femininity and natural order. And I think like I have this, like, somewhere in the back of my head is this tiny little psycho angry feminist. That whenever I have this, like, these thoughts around this stuff,
Sorry,
like, but like, it's not that I agree with her or him, whoever they are. That it's just like, when I have a thought of what I want to discuss, my first thought is like, there's somebody on the internet right now who will castrate me for even thinking this and wanted to talk about it out loud. But it's exactly why I have to talk about it, because it's, the question is like, well, are the new systems of trying to do things working for men and women? And we can look across society and see the statistics and say, like, no, not really. And so in terms of like the natural order thing, like masculinity for men, like pushing into your edge, leaning into your edge, trying new things, that it's, I'm curious, get more of like a thought, or I guess around like the Orthodox perspective on this thing of, like, the hierarchy. I think it's like God, then man, then woman, then child, something like that. Or maybe like God and then man, slightly above women in certain regards, and then child.
But there is
But
we have a notion that one of the things that works really well in classical thought, and which in Orthodox theology also works well, that you can look. It goes back to sort of our concept of the Trinity of Father,
mm,
Son, and Holy Spirit. Someone has a primacy, which is the Father, but there is also, while there is a hierarchy in the Trinity, there is also absolute unity, and so you have to hold both at the same time. Are they contradictory? Yeah, but it doesn't make sense unless you hold them both together in tension. And so the same sort of thing obtains in relationships between men and women. There is sort of a natural hierarchy, but there's also an equality at the same time. Man
mm-hmm.
was created first before woman. Okay, things tend to work pretty well. I mean, in my own marriage, I mean, we parse out our responsibilities, and we came by it rather naturally early on. My wife took one look at my checkbook and said, "I'm handling the money from now on." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And it was so. She has a science degree. She has a BS. She's a medical technologist. She's very good with those kinds of details. It's me, sort of the artsy, undergraduate in archetypal psychology and studying religion and all of this. I couldn't balance a checkbook. I had an allowance for like the first 5 years we were married, and I didn't even know how much I made because we met in the hospital, so we worked together in the same
Mm.
department, and the supervisor knew I was useless in that stuff, so he just gave my paycheck to my wife. She would give it to me face down with a pen to endorse, and then I was given coffee money every, and that was it. But I mean, back to the point, there are things my wife does, there are things that I do, and we
Mhm.
each sort of have our spheres.
Mhm.
And most people kind of work that out. No, I think, and
Yeah.
people, and sort of this like, well, the only possible alternative to the liberated free world that we have today is to return to some oppressive 1950s Leave It to Beaver situation, or father knows best, with a moral barrel man for a father who's emotionally dead and
Mm.
disconnected and disengaged, because that's the only possible alternative to what we have. I'm sorry. I get real. I have very little patience with that anymore.
Yeah.
No, you can never go back, and I don't advocate for going back. But
No.
there's some truth there. So how do we live? How do we live a fully natural life? How do we respect the fact that we have these natural capabilities, these components of our personality, and some limitations, in a way that optimizes our lives today? And so there's always, again, a creative tension. We have to hold the tradition, but we have to engage with reality and the world as it is today. And is there some tension? Yeah, but if you hold both sides together really well, what you find is it's in that tension that genuine progress gets made.
Mm. Yeah, it's a balancing act. Yeah.
It's kind of a balancing act. Yeah, and you fall a little this side or the other. You try this, you try this. Some things don't work, but it's sort of like bell curve. You know,
Yes.
it's a bell curve. Most
Yeah.
people live optimal lives like perfectly normal in the middle. And it
Yeah.
allows for a little bit of people on the fringes, on the tails. Yeah, there's always going to be those people there. But for the vast majority of people, right there in the middle is
Yeah.
what makes for an optimal life. And it's sort of like the example that you gave earlier of this feminist author who changed her perspective when she had a child.
Mm.
You know, okay, so reality asserts itself, and there are maternal instincts there that, women ignore to their peril,
Yeah.
and not only peril to themselves, but more importantly, to the peril of their children. And this is where, I was doing a lot of research. I was going to try to hold a conference several years ago on issues of atomistic individualism,
Hmm.
because, I mean, we're a very individualistic age. I get that. But I think it gets pushed too far.
That's
And
the big point of the book. Yeah.
okay,
It's
yeah,
going too far. Yeah.
yeah. And so, where is sort of the happy medium, or the solution is not individualism. I've just sort of termed it personalism. And I sort of return back to my Orthodox roots, where, the difference between an individual and a person is that a person is like hypostatically or fundamentally open to other people.
Mm.
That, I am not self-contained and in myself and fulfilled only in myself. I find my full humanity and fully who I am in communion and relationship with other people.
Yeah.
And kind of the rest of the world works that way.
Yeah.
We're designed by nature to be communal beings, and we learn to interact and relate to other people in ways that allow everybody to flourish. So that means if I'm going to, if even in this conversation here with you, I have to respect the bounds of the conversation, the format that we're engaged in, and I need, voluntarily to restrain my own freedom or my own impulses in order to give you the freedom to direct the conversation. I have to restrict maybe what I want to say or how I express myself to be respectful to your potential audience, and I freely and willingly do that. I place constraints on myself for the benefit of our relationship and for the benefit of the people who are going to listen to this. And that's good. It's good.
Yeah. It's a structured softness. We like to refer to it.
Okay.
It's like,
I like
yeah,
that. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the natural order thing. One thing that popped in my head was, I think there's just something about life that people have this perception of you can just, especially for men, you can just like decide what you want to do with life and then go live that life. When in reality, it's like live the life and you'll start to see like where you really want to fall into the hierarchy of things and be okay with it along the way. Like I'm never going to be as successful as Elon Musk, and I'm not complaining about it. Like I'm just my path in life is different, and what I'm able to do and help people with is different.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I had a buddy of mine. I went to college. I'm a bit of an intellectual. I like to read a lot of books. I watch a lot of podcasts. I do a lot of thinking. This whole thing with the men's work, I'm trying to get from the angle more of like science to kind of like help those guys understand like what's the neuroscience, what's the biology
Mm-hmm.
behind what it is to be masculine and what men feminine, and like, and I mean he was a good friend of mine. He works as he does steam fitting. It's like welding, like industrial
Yeah.
welding in large
Yeah.
buildings and whatnot. I remember years and years ago we were driving somewhere and we had a conversation where he's like, yeah, I wish I had paid attention more in high school. Maybe I could have gone to college. I could have done so well, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, bro, maybe I can do math problems, but I can't fucking build shit the way you can. We would not be here today if not for guys like you doing what you do. So even though you're not like a giga level academic, like you said, you have a lot of purpose in the world. Don't ever forget that shit. And I think there is a sense where we're seeing now. You mentioned the bell curve, and I've had this thought for years, and I want to get someone to draw a picture, like a painting of it, of like creating a bell curve and having people standing on it, but like have one person on the left side, one person on the right side, and then like a couple people in the middle. And the people on the outsides, on the outskirts, are like throwing rocks at the other side,
Uh,
but they're only hitting the people in the middle.
uh,
And that's exactly what I see happening is like the extremes are trying to like counter each other, but they're taking down people in the middle as a result, where most people are just like, this is probably where I'm best living at. It's like, well, on one extreme, it's like, if you're not making 8 figures a year as a masculine man who's 6 feet tall with a 9-foot, dick and driving a Bugatti and all that stuff,
yeah.
or if you're like, or if, hyper masculine, hyper feminine, whatever it is. And it's like, if you're not over here, something wrong with you. Like most people are in the middle and they're happy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that idea of just being okay with where you lie, but like doing stuff in your life to figure out where it is you want to fall in the world, where you might sit in the hierarchy, being okay with what you can do, and even like relative hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of like maybe you're not going to be Elon Musk, but maybe you'll be the head of the household as a man,
Yeah.
and you find some value in that. This was a funny moment for me. I mentioned this before. Is like my last girlfriend. I can remember over the years, a good amount of the times I've had girlfriends tell me they love me. but we were going somewhere near where she lived to a restaurant that we liked, and like two options to get there. Well, option A was to take like this, like walk on this long busy street. It's in New York City. This long busy street, lots of cars coming by, lots of people. Option B was shorter, but it was through a narrow path of winding buildings with some shady characters there at nighttime. We were going there at nighttime together. And I start walking towards the short path because that's what I've always been used to going down. And she starts pulling me towards the long path. And I was like, whoa, where are we going? Where are we going? And she's like, oh, I don't go down that short path by myself. But if you want to go that way, I'll follow you. You're the man. And it was like this quick, subtle way of her saying, like, if something happens, I trust that you're going to do everything you can to keep me safe and protected. And like, it was like just like the ancestors, just oh my god, I never forgot that moment. It felt so good. It's like, tell me you love me, tell me you love me, tell me I make you feel safe.
Yes.
As a guy, that was that. I'm going to live off that for the rest of my life. Like that was like the best comment to hear. But that's something I wouldn't have experienced if I hadn't been put in the situation to feel like, oh, that felt really good to know that I have some kind of protection value to this person that I deem like comparatively vulnerable compared to other men out there. So like when we'd be hanging out or walking places, she'd be like, just happy in a great mood. And I'd be like involuntarily scanning, is this guy a threat? Is this guy a threat? Is this guy going to be weird? This guy looks a little weird. Let me can like position myself a little bit differently.
Oh yeah, we do it. My wife is I won't say oblivious, but men scan. I think more intently than women, at least when we're together. When she's by herself, I have watched women by themselves, like go into parking garages and whatnot, the way they hold their purses, the way they move from, at night, like from street light to street light so that they're always illumined and all of that. When she is with me, she doesn't tend to think about it, but I'll move her over and I will walk next to the curb of the street.
Yeah.
Or I
Yep.
will hold her hand on the side where her purse is hanging from her shoulder, so that, because I've seen someone come by on a bicycle. I was with friends one time when it was in Naples, Italy, when I was studying in Italy. Came by and this guy grabbed the necklace off of the girl I was walking with and snatched it off of her neck. He was riding one of those little Vespa scooters, and had driven by and saw that she had it and came back around and just reached out and snatched it off and drove away. And I mean, we were so shocked, but then immediately she burst into tears in the sense of violation and all there. I mean, my God, neither I nor her boyfriend, who was on the other side of her, were just, it was remarkable how well it was done. But we both were deeply ashamed. I remember kind of looking at him and him looking at me and say, man, we failed as men. We didn't need to say a word, but we were two guys and there was one woman and we didn't protect her.
That's a weird situation, but I understand the feeling.
Yeah,
like you couldn't have predicted he was going to do that.
We couldn't have predicted it anyway, but somehow, it was it was the expectation, and she was comfortable in our company and, had relaxed, and not that she needed to be as vigilant, but she didn't feel the need to be as vigilant because we were doing that for her.
Yeah.
And guys like doing it.
Yeah.
We like doing it, and it's natural to us. But we feel real good when we can do that.
Yeah, and that's the flip side of that is like a woman leaning into her feminine. Understanding, like even in the case, it's like I think I naturally gravitate a little bit more feminine than the average man, at least in my pursuit of knowledge, and I like having long form discussions and deep discussion. And I can very good at reading people's emotions. I'm very empathic, very sensitive to all that kind of stuff. Whereas most guys tend to just be like unga bunga caveman protect, which is fantastic because we need that shit. It's like I absolutely respect, like the guys out there who are just beating the crap out of it. Like, other guys to keep us safe.
That, by the way,
totally yours. But that, there's this reluctance, and I've seen it several times, and I've heard about it from some women who are just like, people are not being, I'd say educated is like the right word. It's like informed about the general best course they're probably going to have towards the life that they want to live. And it's mostly people on the outskirts of that bell curve who are screaming to say, like, you need to be doing this. You need to be at the outliers. You need to be at the outliers. And like a lot of the outliers that we see in like modern day feminism, for example, or like anti-patriarchy, is this idea of like an attack on motherhood, for example, on feminine values of motherhood. And this idea, I do massage therapy. And I've been doing it for almost 10 years now. And I can't tell you how I lost track of the number of times I've had conversations with women who are in their early to mid, if not late 30s, early 40s, who are trying to conceive and having a hard time doing it. And kind of saying without saying, I waited too long and nobody told me.
Yeah.
I was convinced I had more time.
Yeah.
And then on the same token of like these women that are very like, I never want kids, whatever. I met him. I wanted to have an army. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah. And there does seem to be, I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about this, but I mean, it's sort of borne out in some of the red pill literature,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
as well, that the dual mating strategy that seems to be out about age 30, women kind of want to settle down and start a family, you know, and I think in earlier times it was a bit younger. Average age of first marriage in the U.S. right now is 29 and a half. It's kind of consistent. It was earlier, you know, a generation ago. Um, Earlier even in my parents' generation. But that's about the age that they're doing it. But something sort of kicks in, our biology begins to take over a little more, and they want it. And you know, I didn't really look forward to being a father. It was even, I mean, we got married, but I was in graduate school. We got married, and in July, and like that September, we went off to New York. I did my PhD at Fordham. So we moved to Fordham. I was full-time student with an assistantship in the department. My wife worked full-time and had a part-time job on top of it. You know, we barely made ends meet.
Mm.
And there was no way we could start a family. It would have we would have bankrupted us. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there no way. So we put that off. But as soon as I finished my PhD program and we moved back to Dallas, it was like, man, we're both ready. I want to be a father. I want children, and I want them now. And my wife was pretty much the same way. It was odd too because it wasn't until I married off my younger son, which I did about a year and a half ago, that I didn't want to be a grandfather. I mean,
Mm.
even when I married off my younger boy, I said, okay, they're going to have kids in good time. I'm not ready for that. But once I'd sort of, I don't know, I felt like I finished everything. Not only did I
Mm-hmm.
raise my two sons, but they are now married, and they, you know, they'll reproduce on their own. It's sort of like that line in the Psalms, you know, may you see your children's children. I think
Mm.
the biological imperative pushes us that far.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think it really does. And now I can't wait to be a grandpa. I
Yeah.
really can't. And you know, a year ago I would not have said that.
Yeah.
It comes up, and I think these things come naturally to us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
woe betide us if we ignore these things in their time. And like you said, you know, I have had women come to me, you know, in confession or for counseling, who were did exactly the same thing. They put off marriage or they put off having kids because everybody told them, you know, you need to be independent, you need to have your own income, you need to climb the corporate ladder, you need to do all of that. That's the most important thing. And then they discovered they had difficulties, you know,
Yep.
and it wasn't working or it wasn't happening. And the grief, my God, the grief,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
something I can't fully fathom, but the grief there, you know, it's terrible.
The one of
And
the kickbacks of that, the problem is that this still kind of ties back to this meat Lego Gnosticism, like we talked about earlier. But this problem around the perception of like free will as a function of what we choose to define it as, rather than
mhm,
letting our own impulses and biology kind of guide us on a grander scale. That if woman is having grief about not having a family, it's society telling you that, not you. It's not, it's not you. It's society telling you should feel bad because you. When in reality, do you really care? And
mhm.
a lot of times, it's like that grief came from somewhere, and it's like, I there was a good joke from Joe Rogan. It's kind of like the parallel to that,
Okay. Okay.
and he was talking about how it's like you could take a man, like a small boy, a child, you just like you put him in like a science lab somewhere where he is like by himself in a box. He's never seen like a woman in his entire life, and you just raise him in the box, whatever. And one day, like he's in like this glass thing, and 20 years go by, and he's gone through puberty and all this stuff, and he's there. And one day, one of the scientists walks up to the window and shows a picture of a naked woman, and the guy just had like this instinct because like, oh, it's time to fuck. Oh my god, she's so hot. Oh, like, oh, time to fuck. And the scientist is like, how do you know? How do you know about that? We didn't teach you that. How do you know? And he's like, bro, I know what I know. I know what I like to see. And it's all
Yes.
about that. That a lot of this stuff is just like it's perceived as like patriarchal societal influence, when in reality, like there's so much biology going on behind the
Yeah.
scenes that we still just refuse to acknowledge. I've made this point with people. The place that I work at, I rent space for massage therapy, and I drive up and down this particular path like every day, 5 days a week for the past like 5 years, whatever it was. And there's this one area, it's a busy, intersection, a lot of cars, there's a main street and all that stuff. And this one time, I've driven up and down it 100,000 times, whatever it is. And I had one day I was driving down the path and I happened to like catch over this woman, and she was well endowed, friggin' gorgeous, really nice body, and she was wearing like some clothing that was like very much like check me out. And I
Mhm.
came pretty close to getting into a car accident. Not gonna lie, I actually came pretty close
Mhm.
to hitting the
Mhm.
car. And I remember thinking like, I can still remember exactly what she looks like. That wasn't me saying I want to write this down. That was my brain going, when you see this, and this characteristic, certain neurological, biological, chemical functions will just going to spring online
Yes.
independent of what you want. That's
Yes.
going to cause certain things. And so I made this joke with some people I've talked to before. It's like if I went with a woman to the supermarket and like we see like a pile of cantaloupe or watermelon, she's going to be like, oh, cantaloupe, honeydew, watermelon. And I'm just going to be like, boobs, boobs, boobs. It's just like it's involuntary that you kind of see it in a way.
Yeah.
And even for young children, like they know how to nurse, they know how to suckle, they know what a breast and a nipple looks like, even from day one of birth. And to say like, no, all this is society, patriarchy. It's like,
No.
how long are you going to go down this rabbit hole? And at some point, if it is built into our biology, are we going to start to like really try to fight back against it and talk about that, the meat Lego narcissism thing, versus just saying like, well, we can't have perfect lives, but what's the best probabilistic outcome of living a meaningful life? Well, look at what other people have done and try to do your best to emulate it.
Yeah. And again, the desires are natural. They're hardwired into us. And so what do you do with that? How do you use those drives? How do you use that instinctual stuff in ways that make for human flourishing and that add value to the rest of the world? Because I don't think you can really crush it without causing really psychological troubles.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
think what you're seeing, that you mentioned a second ago, you've seen there's a lot of women, and I'm sure there's probably going to be more men coming through. They're kind of
Well,
like,
yes,
it looks like,
that would
yeah,
have been the second point. Yeah, not only are the women grieving, but also the men who wanted to be fathers, who
yeah,
really wanted to be fathers and now can't.
and they're convinced that, yeah, they've been convinced like, yeah, the person next to you is not good enough because some reason that you shouldn't settle. What is settling? Oh, you're not getting perfect. Like nobody's going to have perfection. There is no
I
such.
know, I know. This is I tell couples this. I get in trouble for this, but I'm going to say it here anyway.
Go
But
for it.
I tell couples before they're married, I say, listen, right now we got Prince Charming in love with Cinderella, and it's all sweetness and light. And someday you're going to wake up in bed next to this person next to you and look over at his or her mussed up hair and sour breath, and the thought will come to you unbidden, I could have done better. That's the day the marriage will begin. When it's no longer Prince Charming in love with Cinderella, but, it's just Mike and Jane,
Yeah.
two ordinary, good enough people having an ordinary, good enough relationship, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And being okay with like trying to find ways to manage the spark, build the spark, going through tough times, difficult times, things like that. Nowadays, people are just so encouraged to just back open window policy, just jump out the window as soon as things get difficult, not realizing like, no, this is part of the process. This is
It's part of the
normal.
process, and it's better the
Yeah.
longer you get. I mean, the sort of it's why we in the Orthodox service we always read the account of the marriage feast at Cana in John chapter 2 for weddings.
Hmm.
He changes his first miracle. He changes all this water into wine because they had run out of wine.
Hmm.
And the steward takes the miraculously created wine to the bridegroom and says, most people give the good wine up front, and then later, when everybody's drunk, you bring out the cheap stuff, but you've saved the best wine until now. And the point is, the longer you're at this, the better it gets.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm married 40 years this July. We
Hmm.
celebrate our 40th anniversary. And I prove it in my own life that the longer it goes on, the better it gets. And granted, I mean, my wife is older than I am by a few years. I'm 64. So we slow down a little bit. A great night is watching Jeopardy and the Turner Classic movie, which we joke about, and going to bed by 9 or 9:30. At least
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
what I do. But it's beautiful, and we're comfy, and we're deeply happy, and we're very content.
Hmm.
And it took 40 years to get to this point, but it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And just running from excitement to excitement, and it's not all exciting. There's
Mm.
a lot of really quiet, I guess, boring time in the course of 40 years, in the course of a day. Good Lord,
Hmm.
even in the course of a day. But that's part of life. And so, like you were saying, in your dopamine cycles before,
Yep.
there's highs and there's lows, and for the rest of it, it's not always a party.
Yeah. A lot of people are being trained on much more excessive dopamine swings, and also like trying to keep it as high as humanly possible for as long as possible. And yeah, I've another one I think I'm thinking of. I was I think my last girlfriend, and maybe she'll watch this and she'll hear me say this. I don't know. That I remember her, one of the points she wanted to break it off. I remember one of the points she wanted to break it off, and I had my issues, she had her issues, and like a lot of it kind of ties back into like attachment theory, where she was fairly avoidant and I was more anxious, but I tend to be a little bit disorganized. So if I find an anxious woman, I'm going to be a little bit more avoidant. Anyways, I remember her saying one of the points was like, well, what if something happens? What if something goes wrong? And I just remember thinking like, yeah, no shit, something bad is going to happen. Like, that's okay. The point is not that bad something bad happens. The point is that you work through it.
Yeah.
With the exception of maybe if I like was a cheat on her or something like that, which I never would have done. But
Yeah.
the idea of like this, we have a whole generation of people who are afraid of the unknown. And this kind of ties into the masculine feminine thing.
Yeah.
It's like part of like healthy masculinity is saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah. And I'm going anyway.
Yeah. And I'm
And
going to
I'll
go, I'm
course
just going to see what
correct along
happens.
the way.
And it's a certain degree of like more on the philosophical aspect of things. And it's ways this ties into the science too, is like, oh, okay, we'll go down to this rabbit hole. Why not? This idea in social psychology of like approach withdrawal systems in children, and how like we're naturally wired to either want to move towards something or move away from something,
Mhm.
depending on that looks like a threat. Ooh, that looks interesting. Let's go towards it. That growing up as children, the best environment you can have is an environment where you can just try everything, because you're born with like a massive amount of hardware space to like download stuff and ideas, but you don't come with anything beyond just your personality and base your instincts. So you have to learn the world around you.
Mhm.
This is why the podcast is called like the Adaptive Men, because it's all about like you need to learn to adapt to different environments, and we are as creatures are ridiculously adaptive to
Mhm.
our environments. But within those approach withdrawal systems, it's like you have to actually practice engaging that approach system towards new things, and you have to practice subduing and calming down that withdrawal system. And a big part of that is letting kids just run and fall and scrape their knees and get into fights and learn how to deal with conflict, and trying new activities and seeing what they like and pushing their comfort zone, like David Data says about the leaning on the edge and whatnot. But if you have an entire childhood where these kids grow up where everything is taken care of for them, it's
Safety.
complete safetyism. It's there's no stepping out of the comfort zone. They will turn into full blown adults who are just terrified of their own shadow,
Yes.
and nobody can say like, well, why aren't men anymore? What's going on? And part of that idea is like the masculine is like purpose, direction, you know, drive moving forward. The feminine tends to be more in the realm of like abstract, free flowing, could be anything. It's creation but also chaos at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's almost like part of this is almost like ironically overlaps in like the idea of like the phallic symbol. Like it's like almost something like trying to like the masculine has to pierce into
Yeah.
the idea of the feminine to try to like move forward, because the feminine is going to be something associated with uncertainty. So healthy masculinity comes down to this point of like wiring your approach withdrawal systems to be able to confidently say, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm confident I'll figure it out. I'm going to just go into that uncertain situation, kind of like the way the piercing of the masculine into the feminine, pun intended, that like
It works on a number of levels.
yeah, yeah.
That's Peterson says when things work on a number of levels, it points to the it grounds it more firmly in truth.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
No, I sometimes tell the guys, if you'll pardon the mild vulgarity, learn to walk into every room dick first. Because a lot of them
Yeah.
are just so hesitant and what is it? What are you? They don't penetrate the world.
That's
You know.
yeah, David Data or Glover. I think Dr. Glover uses that.
Yeah, I think Glover mentions it that way. But they're sort of hesitant. They'll walk in, but like there's no presence there.
Yeah.
I remember in high school, there was one of the football players, the total high school jock and all of that, who could walk into a room, into the back of a classroom, and everybody knew he was there without turning around. The guy had so much presence. It was just immediately, as I sort of said, "What was that?" But I would watch all the girls would turn because he was gorgeous too. All the girls would turn to look and smile, when he walked in. But walk in behind you where you don't see who's coming in, and you would know.
Yeah.
That was that kind of stuff, that kind of charisma is real because I experienced it, early on. Not a lot of us have that, and I suppose it can be cultivated.
It can be, and I can actually point to my own life with that. But yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it can probably be cultivated to a degree, but
Yes.
but still, a lot of the younger guys seem to lack that. It's one of the things that occasionally people will lob a little bit of criticism at me and my men's work. Well, man, they're just arrogant and they're pushy, and they don't think about anybody else, and all of that, proud, especially in the gym culture, where I hang out. And it says, actually, no. See, what I find overwhelming is this crushing lack of self-respect, this need for validation from other people, and this inability to be assertive. Guys don't need to be taken down a peg or two. They need to be lifted up 5 or 6 just to be sort of normal or average or balanced, bell curve again, where, just, normal degree of assertiveness. I'm not talking about turning them into arrogant bastards or, aggressive men, but just learning to be assertive and to have appropriate sense of their own boundaries. A lot of these guys have none of that.
Yeah, and I think part of that is this. I'm kind of narrowing down with the coaching now. I think I'm going to be moving in the direction of working primarily with nice guys and nice guy syndrome, just because I can speak volumes to that shit, having lived in my own life.
So can I, and the market.
It's a good story. I definitely want to get that story on tape about the. You talked about how that, but when you mentioned a second, can it be taught? I remember like this is a funny story. Back in high school, middle school, like early middle school, high school, I was super duper skinny. I had like no muscle mass. Like my head compared to my body was gigantic.
Okay.
I had no muscles, no biceps and things like whatever it was. And I was insecure and I was timid and I was this and that. And like I kind of blew up my first relationship because it was exactly she's just like, she didn't say it without, she didn't know what she was saying, but after a while I was just like, you need to grow the fuck up and be like more of a man. This is really the problem is. But at some point I ended up getting like my ego inadvertently crushed by an ex-girlfriend. And it wasn't even like malicious. I'm actually still friends with her and she knows like what happened. And I ended up trying to be her girlfriend basically. And she told me everything about this guy she like had like a hookup with who basically sounded like sexual Superman compared to me. It completely blew up my ego. But for a long time I was talking, I want to work out, I want to get in better shape, but I'm scared of the gym. I'm scared. And eventually she just kind of said like, I just slept with like Hugh Hefner and you suck by comparison. In so many words she kind of said without saying, and I was like, oh, and it destroyed my ego. And then the next day I went to GNC and spent like $500 on supplements, protein powder and testosterone boosters and everything, and I started working out like crazy for the next 6 months and I got in great shape. And that's around the time when I joined the crew team, because the crew team, I joined it because I was like, I want to work out, but I also know I need like discipline and I need to do something that sucks. Because most of my life up to this point, most of my childhood was a lot of safety, a lot of protectionism. I need to do something that fucking blows, that it's going to make me a better person. And I think we've talked about it before, like the idea of like a contextual alpha, that like I went from, it was like whiplash for me. I went from nobody gave a shit about my existence to I'm in great shape and I'm on the crew team and I was like captain of the crew team. Every single girl was chasing after me. Like not every, but maybe like 90%. I had, but it was almost like there was an inertia to it where it's like, I was physically attractive and I was so confused. Like, you used to never talk to me. Like, what the hell is going on right now? And I didn't even know how to take like full advantage of it. Like I said, like I should have been like sleeping around like a king, but like it was insane to go from that. And then I remember I had a girl back in high school in like 10th grade. She was Filipino. gorgeous, like freaking absolutely drop dead gorgeous. And at some point I'm like, hey, I really like you. I think you're, kind of cool. I have some feelings for you. And she was like, I like you as a friend. Sorry. And I was like, oh God, that fucking kills. It sucks. Oh my God. And years later, I got in great shape. I hadn't seen her in a long time. She helped me a lot with like my fashion sense back in senior year. She was very into fashion. I was like, listen, I want to change my wardrobe. I feel like I'm tired of wearing baggy clothes and looking like shit. And she into it. So I reached out to her. She said, yeah, I'd be happy to help you. She helped me with my wardrobe. I got in really confident. I got in like, looking good in my senior year in high school. Wearing good clothes, got my first girlfriend. And it kind of like, it was one of those springboards in my life to make it a little better. Years later, she happened to be back in town. And I was like, oh my God, you're back in town. We should just like catch up for a drink, because like that, you helping me was such a pivotal turning point in my life to where I'm getting today. I just want to thank you and just see how you're doing, catch up. And we're having drinks and she's getting a little buzz, and I could see she just can't sit still. She's a little fidgety. And she was in town because one of her family members got into like a major car accident. She was coming to visit. And at some point I stopped her and I was like, are you okay? Because I was not reading anything. Are you okay? Everything okay with you right now? And she's just like, I'm like, are you thinking about your cousin? Do you want to go home, see how he's doing? I don't want to hold you here. And she's like, because I was in really good shape compared to how she knew me back in high school. And she just looked at me and she's like, listen, I'm really horny and you're really friggin' hot. And like 10th grade, 15-year-old me from like 8, 9 years ago is like, holy crap. Oh my God. The hottest girl to me in high school just turns out she wants to like sleep with me. And I ended up blowing it up. But regardless of that whole situation, it was still just like an eye opener of like, and this is a cool point to talk to with the red pill stuff is like, you mentioned before, like red pill is very good about descriptive, but terrible about prescriptive.
Yeah.
And it's like, you should work out. You should be in good shape compared to your body as a man. But it's not that you're going for the six pack because girls like six packs. It's they're looking at you saying, what can you model through your actions and your body and your words that demonstrates discipline? And that's what's so effing sexy about being in good shape, because it's not easy to do and it requires a lot of discipline.
Discipline.
And in doing so, you get more confident. You feel exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
It's all of those internal characteristics and traits that I think are what are ultimately attractive to women. So that having a good body demonstrates that, but also holding down a job. You can get up every day, Monday through Friday, and go do the grind, and bring home the bacon and provide, and whether you feel like it or not. It demonstrates the kind of characteristics for being able to provide and to protect that women find very attractive.
Yeah,
they
and I
look
think
for in a mate.
Part of the problem we're seeing nowadays is that I think a lot of women, I've heard it's referred to in the red pill space. It's like there's what women say they want, is what women think they want, and there's what women respond to.
Yes.
And part of like healthy masculine is knowing what they respond to, going along with what they say they want, just to have some degree of coherence with the relationship, but also recognizing like there's a weird paradox a lot of guys don't grasp, even women don't really grasp. It's like they think they want one thing and then like actually they respond. It's like, I always say this, like women will say like, oh, I want a nice, kind, caring, gentle. And I'm like, okay, cool. Then why do you keep dating the tattooed rock star he's who dumped you 3 times over? And then there's a nugget of truth within there. It's like, well, what does he represent? Like I look at like I've talked about this before. It's like the two sides of the spectrum is like there's the nice guy and then there's the bad boy, and then in the middle is the grounded man.
Yeah.
Grounded masculine man. The nice guy is the kind, caring, loving, sensitive person, but the bad boy is like, I'm going to keep you protected from the monsters and the wolves out there. But the problem is the nice guy goes too far in that one direction of people pleasing. The bad boy has no sense of how to like hold down long-term relationships. And if you could just take the two of them, combine them into one man. I actually had a girlfriend in college. Remember, I didn't have a girlfriend. It was a girl I was seeing who was also seeing another guy at the same time. And I remember it was a whole fiasco. But I remember her saying something like, I wish I could just take both of you and just stick you together into one man. Because he was like super kind, caring, and I was like, I'm the big jock. I was in shape and do all this stuff and all the masculine stuff. And she's like, I want to just take both of you. And I remember thinking like, well, you can't. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, oh shit, she was actually right.
Yeah.
Like a grounded man should be disciplined and assertive and like strong and capable and piercing the world, while also having the ability to hold space, to be empathetic, to be sensitive where need be, to hold all that stuff. And it's like, it's totally possible to be those things.
And again, hold both in tension. And it's in holding both in tension that the creativity of the progress is. And I'll push that just a little bit further. That if we use as a heuristic, as a model, Robert Moore's archetypal work on King, Magician, Warrior, and Lover.
Yep.
In his schema, what you're describing, particularly in sort of the bad boy, or I think in a previous conversation we had, we were talking about dark triad personality types.
Yeah, narcissism,
Machiavellianism,
and psychopathy.
And psychopathy.
Yeah.
Are actually the active bipolar shadow form of each of the male archetypes.
Yeah.
And that what you need is, and again, it's not, and here's where I think the red pill stuff really goes off the rails.
Yeah.
Because they want to say, oh, yeah, you want to be Machiavellian, you want to be manipulative, you want to get what you want from a woman, you're just going to use the world, and who's their bugbear is sort of the nice guy. We don't want to be the beta male. We got to be the hardcore alpha male. And the problem is that both of them are shadow forms of an authentically healthy masculine archetype.
Yeah.
And so, I think maybe, if your own work, if you're trying to bring these two together, I don't know that it's a blending of the nice guy and the bad boy. Somehow the mature masculine will transcend them in a way. And I don't know quite what the label is, if you can find some, archetypal figure or something to put
the king.
The king, the king would work,
Yeah.
Who embodies all of these things, but in the most positive way that not only enriches his own life, but enriches the lives of everybody else that he comes in contact with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is one of the ways that I put it, is that, all of these, to circle around to sort of my religious perspective, all of the aspects of attributes of masculinity are given to us by God. It's part of our endowment, as human males. And having received them, we should be grateful for them, which not a lot of guys are in the contemporary society, because they're downplayed and poo-pooed and ridiculed. But I think we ought to be grateful for them. Then out of the gratitude that we have, that I have these capacities and these talents and these skills, then give them voluntarily to make the world a better place. And I think that's where some really deep satisfaction in life comes from, when I can show up in a really mature masculine way for my wife, for my congregation, for anybody else, even for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are really good moments.
And it's interesting tying back into I do the nerdy science stuff. It's you can kind of two things I could tie into. One, it's if we say men lean more towards the masculine, and generally the masculine tends to be more generative, the feminine tends to be more consumptive, but not in a negative, they're just consumers. No. It's the masculine gives the resources, generates the thing, and the feminine, in this case, the woman, will consume the resources and then create life, which is generating again, and it just creates a cycle.
Yeah.
And the other point is the idea of the bad boy, nice guy thing, and it's actually fascinating, and it's pretty effing crazy. It's that it's probably happening on this level. Is that the bad boy is the tough guy? He's the charismatic. He's assertive. He knows how to hold presence in the room, but he doesn't hold on a relationship. A nice guy is kind, caring, sensitive, sweet, whatever it may be, and you want the two. If you look at women's menstrual cycle as it goes from start to finish, you see that what happens is they go through an ovulatory phase and I think you know what I'm about to say, ovulatory phase and a shedding phase. And during the ovulatory phase, we've actually done research and it's proven it that they are more attracted to masculine qualities of deep voice, big muscles, assertiveness, confidence, holding presence, holding strong boundaries, comes across as sexy. But then when they're shedding and they're menstruating and they're down the cycle, more caretaking qualities are more attractive. So nicer, kind, caring, because they're maybe emotionally a little riled up because the hormones are going a little through a natural cycle. Mm-hmm. They're a little bit more sensitive. So the guy that is a little bit more caring and kind and comforting is helpful during that point. And then when she's like, oh, I want to get pregnant, what am I going to get pregnant by? The biggest, toughest, strongest, assertive man in the room. So then what we're seeing now on a grand scale is that things like birth control may actually be affecting men's psychology on a large societal scale, because what birth control does is it perpetually puts you in that shedding phase hormonally. So there's actually been actual stories of women that were on birth control, met a guy, fell in love, got married, decided they want to have kids, got off birth control, lost all interest in their husband sexually because the hormones in there were screwing with her sense of what she actually found attractive along the way. And the trade-off is like, well, I didn't get pregnant, but I also found the wrong person because it wasn't authentically me going through it. And then the idea being that on a grand societal level, we may be just creating an entire generation of nice guys through things like hormonal birth control and excessive exposure to feminine figures. Like, growing up, you spend a lot of time with mom. You don't see dad a whole lot because he's out working. You're at school. All the teachers are female. You have problems later on in life. You're going to therapy. All the therapists are mostly female. And it's just like, where is that masculine figure along the way? And I'm going to make a video about this idea of like, mothers love him, women hate him. And the idea that like the attributes and the personality set that you had created to make sure your mom was happy with you is not the thing you're gonna need for like a wife down the road as a man. Because like a wife doesn't want to be mom to you, she wants to be wife to you in some way. And this disproportionate exposure, we got single motherhood gone on the rise, a lot of men being, and there's reasons for the single motherhood beyond just like, picking the wrong guy, but how it all interlocks into this stuff. And a lot of young guys who may have had like this broken exposure to healthy male figures in their life are leaning more towards what we see more like traditional feminine attributes of not being as kind, caring, sweet, comforting, but having no sense. I've had talked to guys about this where it's like, you've got this half figured out. Like, you are kind, caring, sweet, kind. You need to find your animal. Because like there is some part of you that's just like, how many times do you hear these stories about women who are like, they're the boss bitch at work, but when they're at home, they love when he just takes charge and he's just the man and holding her face into a pillow, whatever the fuck she thinks what's going on, and things like that. But some expression of like, I've got strength and I can show it, not just physically, but also emotionally, mentally, spiritually, whatever it may be. And I know how to hold ground depending on where you need to be. It's like maybe if you're depending on where you are on your menstrual cycle and things like that. But like then creating that kind of safety, which then creates this masculine container that allows the feminine to flourish out of it.
I mean, just as you say that, I was reminded, it's in the introduction to Robert Bly's Iron John. So he wrote this in 1990. Well, he wrote it in the late 80s. He published it in 90. And he said when he was first doing men's work in the 70s, so he was doing these talks, these conferences, these little get-togethers for guys, for men, and whatnot. And he said, they're really nice guys. They're not interested in hurting the planet. They're affirming, and trying to be emotional, supporting their women. But he said, there's no life there. They don't bring anything to the table, and you need something fierce. That's why he wrote the book about the wild man. He says, where's the animal? Where's the passion? Where's the, where is it? And why doesn't it ever come out? And learning to get in touch with that, and again, find ways properly to canalize it, to channel it in a way that's genuinely helpful and useful. And I don't know, I think a lot of guys are just scared to death of it.
Yeah, because it's been conditioned out of them in some sense, mostly through society, through excessive feminine influence.
Any kind of strong emotional response, whether that be, one of lust or anger, or whatever it may be, just not real comfortable with that.
Yeah, and I remember a while back I was on like a weekend vacation with my last girlfriend, and we stopped at this store. It was one of these like random gift shops that you just love to explore into. And so it was all like gems and crystals and this and that. And one of the things I'll never forget was this statue, and it was like this figurine statue, and it was a woman who was like kneeling down on the ground, and she was pregnant, but the pregnant belly was the earth. So she was like giving birth to Earth itself. She was Mother Nature.
Gotcha.
And when you said a second ago, like they care about the environment, they care about this and that, and it's like there is a certain unhealthy perspective towards nature and the environment that people have. Extreme environmentalism, for example. Jordan Peterson talks about this, that like Mother Nature, we're raping and destroying and pillaging the environment. And it's like, do you know how fast nature would try to kill us if it got the opportunity to? That's not a healthy. That is a mother. I mean, on some level, there's like the devouring mother. There's the shadow of the feminine in there, but it's like to say that nature is a purely benevolent force that only wants the good for us. It's like,
and that we must care for and cultivate cultivate because she can't handle it on her own, which I find is extraordinarily patriarchal, just as I say that. You know?
Yeah. That's kind of funny you say that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually published. I have a small monograph on Orthodox and environmentalism. So I spent 2 or 3 years like deep diving into this with a co-author that was really quite knowledgeable. Uh, but yeah, some of the no nature red in tooth and claw, is also part of the reality there. And yeah, that's a rabbit hole. Probably should not get off on that particular one. I don't think I could stop if I did. So
If I'm curious if you have how much more time we have. If you can mention the story we talked about before, the last time we talked was about when you were on your nice guy journey and where it led you to, and then how you kind of got out of it. And I don't know how it I think it ties back into your men's work from personal experience.
Oh yeah. I was sort of classic nice guy. I mean, Dr. Glover. I mean, I think a lot of guys are, but I mean, I remember the first time reading it, says, "My God, I'm on every page of this book."
Yeah, that's me.
How the hell does he know me this well? Yeah, nice guy with a capital N. And I had issues. I mean, it was okay. I mean, my marriage has always been okay, but I think we were in sort of a holding pattern. Had issues with my youngest son. He was. We knew he was smoking pot and drinking. We did not know how much, and we were shocked to discover. And he got in trouble with the law several times, and it was very bad his last 2 years in high school. I wasn't leading well in my congregation at the time, and I lost like 3 of my leading families, including the leadership of the church and my choir director, which in an Orthodox church is a really important position. Lost my choir director, my council president, and all of this, and 20% of the annual parish income in one day.
Wow. One day.
Yeah, one day they walked out. And this sort of precipitated a crisis, and it wasn't 2 months later that I found myself in the back of an ambulance, in a straitjacket, literally in a straitjacket, tied down to a board, hyperventilating and crying hysterically on my way to the emergency room. It was a full-blown panic attack. I had no idea what was happening to me. And well, I forget what they give you to bring down your heart rate. I forget the name of the drug. It's wonderful stuff. They wouldn't even let my wife in to see me until after they had calmed me down.
Yeah.
And I remember just, of all things, when my wife came in, I turned my head aside away from her because I felt so ashamed of myself. I don't know why, but I felt like my entire masculine frame, my whole life had just fallen apart. And it was unspeakable to me. And then this sweet young thing came in with her clipboard. She was the social worker, because clearly I was a mental case. She come in with her clipboard. He says, "I know who you need." And her supervising psychologist, she referred me to him. And Dr. Francis J. Matisse, he's probably not in practice anymore. He is this scrappy old dude who grew up on the south side of Chicago in the bad neighborhoods. And this guy like beat the shit out of me in like 3 sessions. He took no crap whatsoever. It was like, "You're going to do this. This is how no, that's bullshit. This." And he held me to no wiggle room whatsoever. Is the most skillful ego dissection I had ever been through. We got to be great friends. We really did. I miss the guy. I'm grateful to him for this day, but he sort of put me back on. And it was shortly after that I wrote in my journal. It was June 29th, 2010. And I actually have a picture of the journal entry. And I wrote, "I have done everything right. I have done everything I was supposed to do, except live my own life." My God. Why did it take me till I was 49 years old to figure this out?
Yeah.
And even today, part of the reason I do the men's work nowadays is because I live with so much regret for literally decades of my life that I wasted because I was scared, because I didn't know what to do, because I didn't have good guidance, because I didn't have a mentor. There was no one to tell me, "You're mucking it up like this, do this instead." And I'm hoping that I can help some younger guys out of this. Anyway, it started me on the self-development journey. I started reading in time management. I got really good at time management. I finally found Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. I ended up in there's one therapist in Greater Detroit area where I live who was licensed by Glover to do treat men with nice guy syndrome. And I went and I got with him. I did about 2 months of one-on-one therapy. And he says, look, I'm starting a No More Mr. Nice Guy group. Why don't you just join the group? So I was in the group for about a year, and it did me a world of good. And then from there, I went on to join some other online men's organizations and groups where I had some accountability. I had some male fellowship. I found some good mentors. And then sort of out of gratitude for that I wanted to give back.
Mm-hmm.
And also with the influx of these young guys into the church where I had, ready to hand a population of young men who were looking for precisely the kind of thing I wanted to give back.
Mm-hmm.
It's been really extraordinary. And so finally, through a wonderful series of events, I met Bedros Keuilian, who is a podcaster. He's an entrepreneur. He owns Fit Body Boot Camps.
Mm-hmm.
So he's works in the fitness realm. And he's sort of become a business coach for me. And he told me one time when we met, it's why he says, Mike, you're old, bold, and jacked. Turn that up to 11 and you'll do fine. But get on social media.
Mm.
So he's the one who got me on social media nearly 2 years ago, I think 2 years ago. And it's been growing very slowly, and I'm content with that. I do some one-on-one coaching. I'm developing an online course I'm going to offer here before too long. I do some speaking. I do some retreats and all. And probably in a year or two, when I hope to retire from full-time parish ministry, I hope to be able to do a whole lot more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But that's it. So I bring, like I say, 40 years of men's work, 30 years of pastoral counseling and confessions, and this real sense of regret for having mucked up my own life in so many ways. Is really what drives me to just bring all of this and all I know from the sort of the classical tradition, philosophy, and the Christian tradition, wrap it all up into a big bowl where, that's sort of the basis for the work that I do. So I'm hopeful. I think
You're on the path.
I got good years in me. I got something to say. It seems to resonate with some people. So that's kind of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Awesome.
Shameless self-promotion there towards the end. I appreciate your willingness to let me go on and on.
Yeah.
Feel free to
Absolutely.
cut it out if it doesn't fit the parameters of your show.
This is perfect. This is totally fine. Probably got more things we could talk about, but we'll probably just wrap it up here and go from there. Where can we find your content?
You can find my content under my handle, Average to Alpha, AVG numeral 2 Alpha. I think it's it's there at the bottom of the screen. I am on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and God help me, TikTok. But that's only because Bedros told me to get on TikTok because my target audience is mostly Instagram, and I tend to do most of my work there. But they're kind of migrating to TikTok. So he says, be there on the ground floor before they get there. So ideally on Instagram, and forgive me if in anything I've given offense or crossed the line for anybody. And if I can be helpful or of service to anybody, they can direct message me on Instagram or Facebook or something like that. And I will find it and respond.
Fantastic. Father Michael, thank you so much for this today. We should do it again sometime.
Thank you so much. This was great. I love talking to you. These are good conversations. We should do more.
Absolutely.